All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I want to welcome you to this virtual program from Mid-Continent Public Library. My name is Angie Mack, and I work on the programming and signature events team here in the Reader Engagement Department at Mid-Continent, and we're glad to have you at tonight's program. Our program tonight is Birds of Missouri with our presenter, Rachel Mandi. So we are happy to offer this and happy you could join us. I do have some housekeeping reminders to go over before I turn it over to Rachel. So the first one you're all doing a very good job of. I want to remind you to keep your microphones muted so we can all hear Rachel and have as little feedback as possible, noisy feedback as possible. So keep them muted. If we need you to unmute, we'll ask you to. Also, I'd like to invite you to put any questions you might have throughout tonight's program in our chat box. You can utilize that box for questions, and we'll answer as many as we can at the end of tonight's program. Also, as in the chat box, I will be adding a couple of items. One is our program evaluation. We offer an evaluation at every program. We'd love to have your feedback. Let us know what you thought about tonight's program, what could have gone better, and what you would like to see from us in the future as far as virtual program content goes. So before I turn over to Rachel, I do want to mention a couple of upcoming programs that you might like Birds of Missouri, you might like these programs. The first one is there on your screen. It is March 24th, so coming up in just a few days. It is available both in person at our Colburn Road Library Center and on Zoom as a virtual program. So that's why we call that a hybrid program. You can register for either version at the link on the QR code there. It is going to be gardening in small spaces. So this program, you'll learn how to grow fresh food no matter how small your space is with gardener Miriam Tata. So we'll explore the best vegetables and herbs for container gardening, and you'll walk away with tips and ideas that are perfect for apartments or other type places. That is March 24th at 6:30. Next, we have growing and using root crops, March 26th. This is a virtual only starting at 6:30. Carrot, turnips, radishes, and other plants with edible parts underground are nutritious, delicious, and add color, crunch, and variety to our diet. So Mark Lyons, an experienced vegetable gardener, will show you in this program the techniques of planting, cultivating, harvesting, and using these underground culinary gems. This program is March 26th at 6:30 on Zoom. If virtual travel is a little more up your alley, we have the Mighty Mo's Hidden Beauty. This program is, again, a hybrid program in person at our Lee Summit branch and available virtually through Zoom on April the 17th at 6:30 p.m. So the Missouri River starts as a narrow Clearwater stream in Montana and ends up as a wide, muddy waterway in eastern Missouri. Along its 2,341-mile path, and before it flows into the Mississippi River, it touches many lives throughout America. We'll take a virtual float trip with our friend, the veteran outdoors writer Brent Frazee, and explore river life at Emo. So that's, again, April 17th at 6:30. Missouri Mushrooms Hunting 101 is going to be a Zoom program on April 21st at 6:30. Mushrooms are a delight for animals and people alike. Go explore the realm of the fungi and learn what role they play in our environment. We'll explore what it takes to mushroom hunt in Missouri and where you can find mushrooms and which may be a good addition to your dinner plate and which might not. And finally, tonight, I want to invite you to think about attending Growing and Using Herbs on April 23rd. This is virtual only through Zoom. And herbs are wonderful plants and add color to our gardens, flavors, and nutrients to our food. Again, Mark Lyons, our friend, an experienced gardener, will show you how to plant, cultivate, and use wonderful plants, herbs. So we hope that one of those, or more than one, maybe all five, strike your fancy and you register for them. I'm going to include links to register for each of these programs in the email reminder I send out tomorrow. And with that, I am going to quit talking and I am going to introduce you to our presenter. So Rachel Mandi is a naturalist at the Anita B. Gorman Discovery Center and works for the Missouri Department of Conservation. So let me stop sharing so she can share. Rachel, thanks so much for being on our program tonight.
Of course. Thanks for having me. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I am going to turn my camera off because I talk with my hands a lot and it's probably going to be really distracting. So good to see you all. I'm going to turn my camera off now and we'll get started. Okay. So welcome. Again, not necessarily needed because Angie did a great job. But my name is Rachel Mandi. I'm a naturalist at the Anita B. Gorman Conservation Discovery Center, which is here in Kansas City. It's just a little bit east of the Country Club Plaza if you haven't visited us before. And please, please, please utilize that chat feature. I love to get questions. So if anything pops up in your head while I'm talking today, put it in the chat feature. I do tend to get a little distracted, and so I may answer it right away. I am going to try to hold off, but just an FYI. I may try to answer it. And of course, the Discovery Center is a part of the Missouri Department of Conservation, where we are here to serve nature and you. So a little bit of our agenda tonight. So this is going to be more of an overview of birds themselves, and then talking about a few birds that you would see in certain habitats towards the very end. As we'll talk about in a little bit, there are a lot of birds in Missouri, and we could have hours upon hours of virtual content about all the birds in the state. And I know I couldn't handle that, so I would lose my mind a little bit. So today is going to be more of an overview, but do look out at the Department of Conservation's programs because a lot of different nature centers will offer virtual programming and will target different things when it comes to birds or other topics. So great resources out there. So we'll start off tonight talking about birds, the study of birds, which is ornithology. Who are they? Where did they come from? Birds of Missouri and the world. Biodiversity, bioindicators, what does that mean in relation to birds? How they contribute to balanced ecosystems, impacts on conservation. And then we'll get into a little bit of birding 101, some ID basics. So maybe you can take some tools with you out on the trail, and then common ecosystems that birds live in here in Missouri. So ornithology, it is Greek, ornis meaning bird, and logos, of course, meaning to study. So it is the study of birds. It's bird science, and it's the zoological study of these critters. Now, specifically, it is the study of homeothermic, endothermic tetrapods. That is going to be the largest words that I use today. So homeothermic is an animal that maintains their own body temperature. So we would also call them warm-blooded. And our endothermic, they can control their own body temperature. So again, kind of warm-blooded. The opposite of homeothermic is what we call poikilothermic. And so they're unable to regulate their body temperature. Again, think like a snake or a frog, something that you see out basking in the sun. And then ectothermic is an organism that body temperature varies with the environment. So it gets a little complicated when you think about that, but that's what they are: homeothermic, endothermic, tetrapod. So they have 4 limbs for our tetrapod. And there are about 400 bird species that have been recorded in Missouri. So what makes a bird a bird? Well, they are the only living animal group that has feathers. All birds have a beak of some sort. They all have claws or talons. All birds lay eggs. And of course, like we just said, they're warm-blooded, homeothermic, endotherms. So why care about birds? Why study ornithology? Well, they're really interesting, and people have been studying them for years. The earliest writings date back to 1500 BCE, which was some writings from India talking about birds. Aristotle wrote about birds, and so they've fascinated humans for millennia. And they just have incredible life histories that help add to Missouri's biodiversity, balanced ecosystem, all the stuff that we're going to get into in a little bit. They create a balanced ecosystem, indicator of health and changing environment. And of course, they're fun to observe. They're awesome little critters. It can be really funny if you have like a backyard bird feeder or something like that. I love to watch the birds here at the Discovery Center. So where did they come from? So this is what we call a phylogenetic tree of all vertebrates. So way back there where that arrow is pointing, that is the beginning of all animals that have a backbone. So the common ancestor for our other tetrapods would be in our tetrapoda there. So tetrapods are our amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. The common ancestor for tetrapods was Acanthostega, and that's one of the first vertebrates with limbs, and they evolved from the lobe-finned fishes. So looking at this chart, our birds are in amniota, which is referring to their eggs. And they're actually considered reptiles. So you may have heard that like chickens are from dinosaurs. They're not wrong. All birds evolved from reptiles way, way, way back in the day, millennia ago. And so dinosaurs, a lot of dinosaurs are more closely related to our birds than they are to other reptiles just because of where they fell in the evolutionary tree. So very fascinating. This particular diagram is talking about like the wing structure and how that evolved from the forelimbs and phalanges, your fingers, from dinosaurs, featuring some pretty famous dinosaurs like Tyrannosaurus and Allosaurids and all that kind of stuff. So birds are an incredibly diverse group. They're in the class Aves. There's 40 orders worldwide, 249 families, and over 10,000 species. So incredibly diverse animals. Here in Missouri, I wanted to throw up this hierarchy so you kind of understand what I'm talking about. So class is a more broad term, orders more specific, families more specific as we continue up our triangle there. So still in the class Aves, we have 20 orders that are featured here in the state, 48 families, and 438 species. Now, that includes 5 extinct species, so no individual is still living from those groups. 3 extirpated species, so that means that those animals did live here in the state, but they are no longer found here, and oftentimes they were pushed out from people, from human influences. 80 species are accidental or casual visitors. So that means that maybe it was a white ibis or a flamingo that got blown from Florida into Missouri. It's rare, but it does happen. So about 80 species are not found here commonly, but they have been found in the state. So that leaves 340 bird species seen annually. That's a lot of birds. So I'm going to quickly kind of go through some of the groups here in Missouri. Now, this is structured similar to a field guide that I have used in the past. So it gets really complicated when you want to group birds, because if you think back to that triangle with the structure of class versus order versus families, when you get into ordering birds based on the order, it gets really specific. And so birds that you would commonly group together because they look similar are going to be in separate orders. And so some books, if you are looking for field guides, some books separate by orders, some do not. So for tonight's purposes, we are not separating by orders. We're just going to take a look at similar looking birds. So again, in our class Aves, we have our ducks, geese, and swans, featuring our Canada goose there. Other swimming birds, which would be like loons or grebes, that's a loon that's featured on the top right. Our aerial water birds, which are things like pelicans or gulls, that's a white pelican featured on the bottom left. And then our wading birds, which are our herons, cranes, ibises. That's a green heron that's on the bottom right. Our shorebirds, we do have shorebirds in Missouri. And the one featured there on the top left, that is a killdeer. So you'll hear them far away from the shore on gravel roads and things like that. They're pretty common to hang out in rockier areas. But we do also see other shorebirds that look similar to that killdeer. Birds of prey, which are going to be things like hawks, eagles, vultures, owls, like the barred owl featured on the top right. Chicken-like birds, so turkey, pheasant, quail. Our turkey featured there on the bottom left. And then our medium-sized land birds, which just jumbles a bunch of things together that are not related. So pigeons, doves, kingfishers, woodpeckers, nightjars, nighthawks. That's a whippoorwill that is featured on the bottom right there, which is a type of nightjar. All right. And then we get into our hummingbirds, swifts, and swallows. So we have a ruby-throated hummingbird on the top left and a barn swallow on the top right. And then our passerines. And passerines is the order name for anything that perches. It's our perching birds. And that would be a lot of things. Flycatchers, typical songbirds like the bluebird that is pictured here on the bottom left. Warblers, tanagers, blackbirds, sparrows, finches, and buntings. That's a female summer tanager that is featured on the bottom right there. So lots of birds, lots of different groups that are featured here in the state of Missouri. So birds are really important contributors to biodiversity. So what is biodiversity? That's the variety of life in the world or in a particular habitat or ecosystem. Biodiversity is really important to kind of tell us how everything interacts. And scientists are saying that we are in the middle of a biodiversity crisis. So wildlife populations have declined roughly 70% in the last 50 years. Now, birds have been in particular very hard hit by this biodiversity crisis. Nearly 3 billion birds have been lost since 1970. And that is particularly affecting forest-dwelling birds. So biodiversity, incredibly important because it's how everything interacts with each other. It is just how much life is on the landscape. And when you're losing a lot of life, it just really can mess up with how everything is in a balance with each other in our ecosystem. And birds, with that biodiversity thing, they are bioindicators. So they're really important for telling us how the ecosystem is working. Is it healthy? Bioindicators, that's a living organism that gives us an idea of the health of an ecosystem, so they can indicate the quality of that ecosystem based on the presence of pollutants or changes in the habitat. So this bird here is a greater prairie chicken, and they need a lot of open sweeps of permanent, diverse grasslands or prairie. Their populations have declined significantly in the state of Missouri because they have lost a lot of that great prairie habitat. Historically, about 1/3 of the state was covered in prairie. It's like 0.01% of that it remains. So these birds, unfortunately, are not faring well in the state because they do not have that quality habitat. But if you restore quality habitat and you could reintroduce these birds to that quality habitat, if they stay there over generations, that can tell you that that habitat is really high quality. It can tell you that the ecosystem is healing itself. So these birds once numbered in the hundreds of thousands in the state of Missouri, but they are likely to soon be extirpated if prairie conservation is not prioritized. These guys are a little more of a happy conservation story. This is the brown-headed nuthatch, and they are native to short-leaf pine savannas, which is a very specific type of habitat located in the Ozarks of the state. Until recently, the brown-headed nuthatch was considered extirpated from Missouri, so no longer found here. The last records of their presence in the state were in like the late 1800s to early 1900s, coinciding with the time that extensive logging removed their key habitat. In the following decades, the former pinelands became wooded again, and the landscapes that were dominated by faster growing oak and hickory trees, they were not replaced by pines. And so their habitat, unfortunately, was lost from logging and then other trees coming in. And so we prioritized restoring their native habitat. And so they've actually been successfully reintroduced in pockets of the Ozarks. And we are watching their population to make sure that they are continuing to reproduce and stuff like that and have a healthy population. So kind of borderline conservation success story, getting there. We love our little brown-headed nuthatches. They're so cute. And the last one that I'm going to mention is a pretty famous bird. You may have seen it before. Our bald eagle, the bird of the United States. Now, this one is a great story for pollutants in the ecosystem. So I always like to tell the story of my dad. My dad grew up in Southeast Colorado, and he never saw a bald eagle growing up. The first time he saw a bald eagle, he was in his 30s, and it was in Kansas. The second time that he saw a bald eagle, he was like almost in his 40s, and it was up in Iowa. And so he did not see bald eagles growing up. Well, that was because of a chemical that was used called DDT. So DDT was used on cropland, and insects would eat the crops that had DDT. It was a pesticide. They would either die from it or they would get eaten. They might have gotten eaten by another animal like a bird or a mammal, or they could have gotten eaten by fish if they happened to live near a body of water. Those fish were then eaten by bald eagles. Now, bald eagles would have to eat a lot of DDT to be able to die from it. But if they had DDT in their system, it affected the lining of their eggshells. And so the adults were still surviving even though they had DDT in their system, but the eggs were not. And so scientists noticed that there was a crash in the bald eagle population where there were no young being reared. And so they had to kind of work that food chain backwards to figure out what was causing it. And that's when they discovered that DDT had this effect on the eggshell lining of birds. It was not just bald eagles that were affected by this. Bluebirds were affected by this. A lot of different birds that eat insects were affected by this. And so we just have it as a huge conservation success story for our bald eagles, because how many of you saw a bald eagle this past year? I know I did. They're around. They're definitely, their population's doing a lot better now that DDT has been banned. It was banned in the 1970s. So we've started to see their population increase, which is really cool. So bioindicators can tell you how good a habitat is for that animal to live there, especially if it is an animal that requires very specific habitat, or it can tell you if there's a pollutant present that is harming the populations. And then birds, super important at contributing to a balanced ecosystem. Do you guys love insects? Insects flying around your head, they're biting you, all that fun stuff. I don't particularly enjoy mosquitoes, and they just make me swell a lot. So I love birds because they eat a lot of insects. And so if you can imagine, if all of our bird population crashed, how many insects would be around? It's kind of nuts. So they really contribute to a balanced ecosystem by eating things that we consider pests, like insects. They contribute to maintaining balanced ecosystems in wetlands, like that green heron eating a frog. And then, of course, eating fish. And there are birds that eat small mammals. There are birds that eat other birds. So really important creating a balanced ecosystem as predators, but then also as prey. Of course, we know cats do eat birds, but so do things like snakes. That's a western rat snake or a black rat snake eating what looks like a sparrow. And then birds eat other birds. Like I just said, that's a Cooper's hawk, I believe, eating another, I can't tell the bird, I'm sorry, but eating another bird. But birds face a ton of conservation challenges. So habitat loss and destruction, kind of like what we've already mentioned with the prairie chicken, that is a huge issue for our birds. And it's not just here at home in Missouri. It's worldwide because birds migrate. And so if their habitat is affected in their wintering or their wintering location, which may be down in South America, it hurts them there. So then we're going to see less of a population. If we're losing habitat here, of course, it hurts them in the reproductive summer spots. So habitat loss and destruction is a huge challenge for birds. Diseases and pathogens. You may have heard of avian flu. Avian flu is a huge issue for most of our water birds. We're seeing that it is really big in water birds, except for Canada geese. Don't know why. That one's kind of throwing me for a loop personally. Invasive species. Invasive species are a huge problem because not only are you competing for resources like food, but you're also competing for shelter. And some of these invasive species, they are like nest parasites. So they will go lay their eggs in a native bird's nest. And because of the timing of when their eggs are laid and how their eggs develop, they develop faster than the native bird. And so we'll just use our European starling here. The European starling baby hatches, and these two bluebirds don't know what to do with it, so they start feeding it because that's what instincts tell them. But then the European starling needs so much more food than our bluebird babies. So when the bluebird babies hatch, they don't make it. And so now you have more starlings that are, surviving that integral growth period right after they hatch than our native birds. So nest parasites is a huge issue as well. And then, of course, like I said, competing for food and other resources as well. Pesticides and other toxins. Just like we talked about with DDT, this can affect birds' food and it can end up poisoning them. And especially the case when it comes to herbicides that are just swathed over large areas of land, or pesticides over large areas of land. Collisions with glass and man-made structures. Around 845 million birds are killed annually, according to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and that was as of 2017. I have heard a higher number, that it's closer to 1 billion birds that are killed annually, specifically with glass collisions. And cats. Cats kill 2.4 billion birds each year. And it's not just birds that cats affect. Cats kill mammals and amphibians and reptiles. So cats really harm our ecosystems. So what can we do about it? That was really depressing. What can we do about it? Well, you can preserve and conserve existing habitats. If you are able to get out and help maintain existing habitats, whether that's picking up litter or pulling invasive plant species or whatever it may be, that is a great way to help our birds. You could establish new habitats. This could be as small as creating a native garden. And it could be a little plot. If you have a native garden with a lot of different plants in it, you're not only going to help birds, because you'd also help some insects too. And those insects would then feed the birds and maybe feed a few other things too. And so you could have a really well-rounded little ecosystem if you're able to plant a little native garden in your yard, or just helping other larger plots of land be restored to what it historically may have been. Plant native vegetation, like I just said. We need natives to be able to support our native animal species. Reduce the spread of disease. If you you have bird feeders out, making sure that you regularly clean your bird feeders. Especially with the bird flu time, I think the recommendation, if I remember correctly, is if you are able to clean it once a week. I know the ideal is every time you fill it, you clean it. But if your birds are anything like the birds here at the Discovery Center, they will go through a nice sized bird feeder in about a day. So maybe not the most realistic, but that is a great way to reduce the spread of disease, using fresh or putting in fresh water in bird baths and things like that to really help out or reduce that spread of disease, excuse me. Leave wild animals wild. If you happen across a little nest of birds, sometimes the best thing is to let nature take its course and, leave them in the wild. We really highly recommend not taking animals to rehabilitation centers unless you absolutely know that they are abandoned. And sometimes that limits the spread of disease as well if you just let nature take its course. I know it's not the fun, happy, beautiful nature story, but sometimes nature is not pretty, and sometimes that is the best way to help these animals is by letting nature take its course. And then keep cats inside. This is a really big one. If you can keep cats inside, you'll really help out a lot of different animal species, not just birds. Cats have single-handedly contributed to the extinction of 63 species of birds, reptiles, and mammals worldwide. So that is, if you are able to do anything, that is a big one I highly recommend and would really appreciate for sure. And then eradicate invasive plants. Birds don't know. They see a red berry and they're like, delicious, red berry. Well, that red berry could be honeysuckle. And then they're spreading honeysuckle across the ecosystem. So if you're able to help reduce and eradicate invasive plants, that could really help birds because it creates a better habitat for them, but then also they're not actively spreading these plants that we don't want to have around. And then education and citizen science. Learning more about the world around you can help in conservation. And citizen science is a great way to take everything that you learned and put it into action. Monitoring birds is essential to help protect them. To understand how these birds are faring, scientists need hundreds of thousands of people to report what they're seeing in backyards, neighborhoods, wild places, all around the world. Without this information, scientists would not be able to share any of the data where we know what birds are dealing with in the world, how they're declining, because they don't have time to do that. So you can join projects like eBird, Project Feeder Watch, the Christmas Bird Count, the Breeding Bird Survey, or even an international shorebird survey. And the department even is having a bird challenge coming up this year. So a question did come up in the chat, and I said, are there any options for control when it comes to starlings? To my knowledge, the best way to control starlings is just to monitor, especially if you're going to have like bird boxes out for like bluebirds or whatever you may choose to try to provide shelter to. The best thing is just to monitor those nests. And if you see an egg that is not for example, bluebird egg, to remove it. Controlling starlings is really difficult because they are in really high numbers. And we don't want to poison anything because we don't want to poison our native birds as well. So unfortunately, there are not great options when it comes to controlling. For controlling starlings, the best one is with just checking eggs in the nest and stuff. Okay, so there are a few other comments, and I'll get to those in a little bit. So, want to explore more? You like birds? How do we start birding? Well, birding is what you make of it, and it is how you want to enjoy birds. I was taught in college that this is the one way that you can do it, and I found I did not enjoy birding in that way. It wasn't until I branched out on my own and I was like, oh, I'm kind of like a lazy birder. And if I'm in the area with binoculars, I'll bird and I'll see what's out here. But I'm not going to go out of my way to find okay, that's a lie. I have gone out of my way to go find specific birds, but I don't do it very often. So if you want to start birding just because you think they're pretty but have no interest in learning their calls, that's fine. If you want to be able to start identifying the sounds in your backyard and then start working on identifying who you are seeing, that's fine. Or if you want to start birding every weekend to create a life list, that's fine too. There's no right way to enjoy birds. Begin birding by going at your own pace. So that is by choosing a field guide or an app. There's lots of apps out there, lots of birds. I have at the very end some that I recommend, but it is totally up to you with what works for you in your birding life situation. Learn some basics of bird ID, and lucky for you, we're going to go through that in just a little bit. Get gear if you want to. Gear will make your birding experience easier, like a pair of binoculars, but they're not essential to start your birding journey. Get outside. Of course, the birds are outside, so you got to get outside. But good thing, they're everywhere, so sometimes it can be challenging to find them, but as your skill develops, you'll be able to hear them a little bit better. You'll be able to figure out exactly what you're looking at, where you need to be to find them. Know where to go. You don't have to stray far from home to go birding. Any green space or open water source will do. Use virtual maps like iNaturalist to pinpoint some good spots and plan your itinerary right from home. If there is any specific bird you want to see, apps and websites like eBird or iNaturalist, like I just said, can help you find the location those birds are often found. I highly recommend that. Like I said, there's been an occasion that I've been on the hunt for specific birds, and I used iNaturalist to see where they were frequenting. Maybe join fellow birders. There might be a club out there or a community of people who enjoy birding, and join up with them, meetups, chapters, online communities. That way you can maybe learn some tips and tricks on how to become a better birder yourself. Find what interests you. Flip through a field guide and note what birds pique your interest. They could be in your local area, or you could add them to your life list and travel to go find them. And then create a life list. So a life list is a list count of all the avians, birds, a birder has ever observed and properly identified. Many dedicated birders allocate time and resources just to be able to keep their lists growing. All right. How to bird safely. Bring or inform a friend. Buddy system works for a reason, folks. So having someone to go with you is beneficial if there's an emergency situation, but also having a buddy may help you spot wildlife. I am notorious that I am horrible at spotting birds, but I have a good friend who is a lifelong birder, and when I go out birding with him, it's great because he can hear them. He's like, hey, look over here. Do you see that? And it's like, no. And then he'll explain it. It's like, thank you. I would have never seen this bird ever. So bring a friend. Sometimes it can really make your experience so much better. If you're venturing solo, just make sure you tell someone. We want to make sure that you're safe when you're going out in nature. Be aware of wildlife in the area. Have you been there before? Do you know if it's like a hot spot for maybe like copperheads, or maybe you're in bear country or whatever? So just know where you're going, know what wildlife could be in that area, and know what you need to do to protect yourself from that wildlife. Also protect yourself from the small perilous wildlife like ticks, making sure that you're wearing tick repelling like pants or socks if they have permethrin on them, or use DEET on your clothes if you're able, because we don't want a tick-borne illness either. Bring a charged cell phone. Self-explanatory, but there may be apps out there that you would like to use, like iNaturalist, Merlin, or even like the All Trails app, which has hiking trails on it. That's a great way to help you and avoid getting lost. And then, of course, you have it if you have an emergency. Pack food and water. Keep valuables out of sight. We see that often in our nature areas, unfortunately. And then watch where you're walking. It is a delicate balance to watching birds and watching where you're walking. I know because I trip constantly. So just, you'll figure it out. You'll get more used to it. I also look out for snakes and lizards and stuff more than when I'm out birding because I get distracted really easily. Avoid getting lost. Self-explanatory. Have a map or a compass. Again, we want to make sure you're safe. That's why I'm telling you all this information. Be aware of when your park closes, especially if that park has a gate. Watch out for trespassing signs, all that fun stuff. Don't bird and drive. If you're out driving and you spot a bird, pull over, please. You want to make sure that you're safe. And then dress for the weather. Pay attention to what's going on. Make sure that you bring clothes, maybe backup clothes in case there's like a pop-up storm, waterproof shoes, and then of course, sunscreen, sun protection. Make sure you're taking care of yourself. All right, some more safety things. Know the laws. Know the state laws and the federal laws. No trespassing, please. A lot of the laws are posted on the sites when you walk in. For birding, it's not as big of a deal, but if you are out to go look for reptiles or amphibians, it is a big deal to know the laws and protect those critters. Know what species are rare, threatened, or endangered. So this is, again, really important when it comes to like reptiles and amphibians. It's still important when it comes to birds because we don't want to pursue these species. We don't want to disturb them in their habitat. And then most importantly, if you do find a species that is threatened or endangered, you can note it on your life list, but don't share that, please. Unless you're going to share it with like the Department of Conservation being like, hey, I found a brown-headed nuthatch at this particular location. We would love to have that information, but please don't go posting it on Facebook because we don't want these animals to end up being harassed or something like that because their locations were disclosed. So we want to make sure that their location is private if they are a rare species. Follow area rules. Again, those tend to be posted. And then protect the habitat. Stay on trails as much as you can. Pack in, pack out. So if you do have trash, make sure that you take it with you so you don't want to litter. Stay out of areas that you know are being used for research, all that fun stuff. And then the last one that is actually one of the last ones that's really important is if you're going to use like bird calls to try to call in specific birds, there's a way to do that. So it's really beneficial to get a closer look to birds or to practice hearing their calls. But we want to be mindful that what you're calling and what habitat you're in. So maybe don't play multiple species calls in one spot. Play one species call in one spot and then move down the trail before playing another call. And like, for example, this is really important when it comes to owls because some owls will eat, like large owls will eat smaller owls. So if you're calling like a great horned owl, you don't want to call a great horned owl and an eastern screech owl in the same spot because if they both come and respond to your call, that could be a not great event for that screech owl. And then our last thing is be a liaison. You know, if you are out there birding, people might ask you what's going on. What are you doing? What did you see? And so if you are enjoying your experience, tell them about it. They may find that this is something that they're interested in trying out and doing that they didn't know that it would be that cool before. So being a good liaison, talk to park personnel, tell them what you saw. They may give you good directions on where to find specific birds before, or specific birds as well. I know I've used that before. Model good ethics and etiquette, and then treat both the animals and public with respect. Okay, so some bird ID basics. So starting off with size and shape. You're going to want to become familiar with silhouettes. This information comes from All About Birds, which in a follow-up email that will be included, a link to that will be included. And so each group kind of has their own look to them, if you will. Judge the size of birds against birds that you know well. We all kind of know what an American crow looks like, the size of an American crow. How does that relate to a house sparrow? How does that relate to a blue jay, to the bird that you're trying to look at? Judge against birds in your same field of view. You may see a bird that you are completely unfamiliar with, and it can be hard to judge size at a long distance. And so if there's other birds around it, you could be like, oh, I know what that bird is. It's smaller than that bird. Okay, let me pop up in my field guide and see if I can figure it out. And then apply your size and shape skills to the parts of a bird. So we want to, in that case, you're going to turn your attention to the size and shape of the individual body parts. You'll look how the bird flies. What does it wing? What do their wings look like when they're fully extended? How do their wings fly? What is that in relation to the other, to maybe their core, to their head, that kind of stuff. And then measure the bird against itself. So this example is a downy woodpecker, which is the smaller, the one on the left, and a hairy woodpecker, which is the one on the right. And those two birds look very similar, but the difference is in the beak size. So on a downy woodpecker, the beak is smaller than the skull, and on a hairy woodpecker, they're about the same length. And so measuring the bird against itself can also indicate who it may be. Your color patterns, is it light or dark? So sometimes you can focus on the overall color pattern instead of every single detail to try to figure out who it is. Are the patterns bold and faint? Is there a bold streak, a fine streak, streaking versus like banding? So in this case, this would be more like streaking. There are some confusing bird species out there that's a side by side in your field guide, and they are wearing what seems like the exact same markings and defying you to be able to actually identify them. So experienced birders can find clues on those tricky identifications, and that's looking at the pattern. So if you are able to kind of figure that out with some of these birds, that'll really help you out. And then outrageous color. Some birds have a flash of color, like a blue jay. You know it's a blue jay because it's bright blue and it's pretty big and it has black and white as well. And so I can help you figure out who it is based on some of those brighter colors. And then behavior. It's posture. How does it stand? The movement. Does it hop around? Does it kind of walk? Its flight pattern. Does it flap its wings a lot? Does it kind of soar like a vulture? How does it feed? Is it at the bird feeder? Is it on the ground? That can tell you a lot of different things. Does it flock with other birds? Some birds are loners, some are not. So are there a huge flock of the same species of bird around? So the other thing is birding by habitat, birding by probability. So if you are in a wetland, you may not see like a cardinal, because cardinals don't hang out in a big wetland. They hang out more in a forested area. Or if you're in the middle of the forest, you may not see a blue heron unless there's a water source by, because they hang out in wetlands or around water. So birding by probability based on the habitat that you're around. Use range maps. Look up in your book. See if you're even in the right area for that bird. That can really help, because I've done that. I've made that mistake before where I see this bird and it's like, this picture has to be it. And that picture of that bird lives in California, nowhere near Missouri. And then check the time of year. Birds are migratory. Make sure that they're supposed to be here in that time of year. And then you can also, before you even go, find out what you're likely to see. eBird and Merlin are two really good apps for that. And then we have our field marks. So field marks tell you, tell you the bird. There are specific parts of the bird that you would note have specific markings. So you may notice a bright red crown, like on a red-bellied woodpecker, or you may notice a white breast, like on a dark-eyed junco. So that's a great way of figuring out who the bird is based on specific parts. There are field marks specific to the head. Like, again, dark-eyed juncos, they have a white eye ring, so it can help you figure out who that is as well. Wing bars as well. So field marks are a great way to work on identification and figure out who they are. So our common ecosystems in Missouri and a handful of birds that are found there. So starting with your backyard, you may see things like the northern cardinal. These guys are found statewide and they're a year-round resident. They're super common. So typically found in like hedges or thickets, berry patches, and they're in rural areas, towns, and even suburban areas. We see them here at the Discovery Center all the time. Very common. Maybe a red-bellied woodpecker. They're also found statewide, another year-round resident, also super common, found in forests, woodlands, parks, and suburban areas. They like to have a lot of trees around, especially if there happens to be like a dead tree as well. Ruby-throated hummingbirds, found statewide, but only in the summer. They're a summer resident. They're pretty common, especially in areas that have forests around, forest edges, streams, and then if you have a nectar feeder, they love that. And then the dark-eyed junco, I know I've been talking a little bit about. They're found statewide, but they're a winter resident. And they're pretty common, found in woods, openings in woods, fields, roadsides, and yards. Another common ecosystem are our forests. And you might see a barred owl. They're found statewide, another year-round resident. Pretty common, found in forested streams, lakes, swamps, and deep woods with big timber. You might find a wild turkey, also found statewide, a year-round resident. Pretty common, found in mixed forests and grasslands. Maybe a pileated woodpecker, found statewide, another year-round resident. These guys are pretty common, but they can be a little on the elusive side. And then they're found in forests and most abundant in like large forests, especially with like big old trees. And then a wood thrush, which is kind of a smaller bird that hangs out more in like the thickets of forests closer to the ground. They're found statewide, a summer resident, and pretty common. And then we have our prairie, like a dickcissel. They're found statewide, a summer resident, and they're pretty common. But they're native to prairies, but they're adapted to farmlands and other agricultural habitats, which is why they're still pretty common. A grasshopper sparrow, found statewide, another summer resident. They're common, but they tend to hang out in like specific areas, so they're localized to the habitats that they reside in. And they're found in prairies, upland pastures, and hayfields. Then we have our Bell's vireo, which is found in the northern glaciated plains and rare throughout the rest of the state, but they can be found throughout the rest of the state. They're a summer resident. They're pretty uncommon, but they prefer dense shrubbier areas within the prairie. And then our northern harrier, which is a bird of prey. They're found statewide, a year-round resident. They're actually a species of conservation concern in the state, so that means that the Department of Conservation has labeled them as endangered, but they're also federally endangered. And they're found in prairies, marshes, and hayfields. And then our wetland. Red-winged blackbird, which I've already started hearing this year. It's great to have these guys back. They're found statewide. They're year-round resident, but they tend to kind of leave the northern part of the state. You may find them still in the southern part of the state during winter. Kind of depends on what's going on and how cold things are. They're very common, especially in marshes, moist grasslands, but even like wet roadside ditches, they're around. Great little birds. I love their calls. A blue-winged teal, found statewide. They are migratory birds, so you'll find them now in certain areas as they migrate through. But then we do have some individuals that will stay here throughout the summer. But like I said, common migrant, a little more locally uncommon. Again, they may stay throughout the summer. They're just a little locally uncommon. So they'll be in specific areas if they are going to be here over the summer. And then they're found at marshes, ponds, and lakes. A great blue heron, found statewide, another year-round resident. They're pretty common and found in aquatic environments where they can wade and forage for prey. That's one of my favorite birds. And then a great egret was found statewide, another summer resident. They're a species of conservation concern. So again, we have labeled them as endangered in the state of Missouri. And they're found in marshes, ponds, ditches, and lakes. So that was a lot of information to throw at you guys. If you have any questions, throw them in the chat. There are a few that have come up, and I'll get to them in just a second. So if you want to learn more, we have a lot of free bird resources that are available. These are just a few of them pictured here. In the follow-up email, there will be a link to that Enjoying Missouri's Birds, which is in the bottom left there, and then also a link to all of the Department of Conservation's free publications. Some of those have PDF files, so you'll be able to access them right then and there. Some do not, and so you may have to go to your local MDC office or nature center to be able to pick one of those up. Hold on, there we go. Now there are a lot of bird apps out there that are free. So specifically for birds, eBird is a great one. It's not the most user-friendly. if you are new to birding. You kind of have a learning curve with it. I personally do not use eBird very often because I'm not an avid birder, but my good friend who birds every single day, it seems like he loves eBird. I love Merlin, the Cornell Lab app Merlin. That is great if you're a beginner birder. First of all, you can go through and organize everything, like categorize it as you see it. So say that you saw a medium-sized red bird and you had no idea what it was. You can go through it and it will tell you, okay, was it robin-sized? Was it crow-sized? You'll just pick what you thought it was. What was its primary color, and it can help you figure out who it was. But also, it has sound ID. So if you're trying to learn bird calls, oh, Merlin is so good for that. I highly recommend it. If you just want more bird information, Audubon or the Cornell Lab's All About Bird site, those are great to just learn more about birds in general. And then iNaturalist is a great site to learn more about a lot of things in nature. Like if you're looking for specific plants and other animals that are not birds, iNaturalist is a great resource. It's used for birds like less often just because sometimes it's hard to record a sighting of a bird if you didn't get a good picture of it, but it's still a great resource to use. Now, if you are looking to purchase a field guide, these are some of the ones that we kind of flip through quite a bit. Not endorsing one over the other. The Peterson Field Guide to Birds is a good one. I grew up using a Sibley book. That's what my grandpa used. And so they're another good one. And then the Kaufman Field Guide is also great. Now, the thing about these field guides is they are all set up differently. And so some are going to be set up based on orders. And then some are going to be set up based on color. Some are going to be set up based on like who looks like who. So just, fiddle around, see what works best for you. And libraries are a great resource to try a couple field guides out. Borrow one, see how you like it. And then if you really like it, you can go purchase it, or you can just keep checking it out. I hope the library doesn't hate me saying that. Birds make any place a chance for discovery. They make a garden seem wild. They are a little bit of wilderness coming into a city park. And for a bird watcher, every walk is filled with anticipation. What feathered jewel might drop out of the sky next? And that's from David Sibley. There's a really beautiful quote about birds. All right, if you have any questions, throw them up in the chat. And I'll just leave this up here for just a second. We have a lot of programs here at the Discovery Center coming up. All of these are registration required, but they do still have spots open. So if you're interested in nature journaling, that's happening this Saturday, the 22nd. One session's at 10 a.m., the other session's at 11 a.m. Bone photo flowers, that'll be Saturday, the 29th. Again, one session at 10 a.m., another session at 11:30. An iNaturalist adventure, if you want to learn how to use the app, that's happening Saturday, April 5th, and that'll be one session at 10 a.m. and another session at 11:30. So I'll leave that up there, and I will take a look at these. So I did see a couple of comments about birds and like changing the laws. Unfortunately, I don't have an answer for you. There's a lot of programs that are out there that exist, like Bird Safe Kansas City, like Bird Safe Cities is a new one that I know the Missouri River Bird Observatory is working on trying to create. Like, I think they're focusing on Columbia first. This is like all like in new information, but it's something that they're working on and trying to put some information out there on how to make cities bird safe. I believe, if I remember correctly, Chicago is a bird safe city. And so that is like one way that we're trying to make things safer. But unfortunately, it is hard because cats are a pet for people. And so you want to respect people's pets. But at the same time, it is hard when they're killing wildlife. Okay. Another comment said, birders always go out early, and I'm not an early bird. I see a lot of birds throughout the day, including night birds. Are there more birds out at the crack of dawn, or do lots of birds have different daily schedules? That's a great question. It kind of does depend on the bird. So a lot of our songbirds, which are, you know, not to be specific, but a lot of birders are going out to see a lot of different like songbirds. They will go out early because they are just starting to become active. It kind of depends on the weather too. So if it's a really hot summer day, all animals are going to be a little more active first thing in the morning because it's going to be a little cooler out. They're going to be less active as the heat of the day goes on. And so the weather and all that depends on their schedules, but birds do have different daily schedules because we have nocturnal birds. Like you may see a whippoorwill during the daytime, which would be awesome. Really lucky to see it. But they're gonna start being more active and like calling at night, or owls, they hunt at night. So it kind of depends on the bird, but a lot of birders do go out early because you are gonna see more of those songbirds and stuff like that. Another comment. I know Les Bluffs near Mountain City is a great place to see eagles and snow geese. What are other great parks or places to see a variety of Missouri birds? Another really great question. Les Bluffs is the one that comes to mind for me because if you're interested in seeing like migratory ducks and stuff like that, Les Bluffs is a great place to go to. And then there's a couple, it kind of depends on where you're at, but there's a lot of different places to see some, like my brain is fogging. There's one in Columbia area. That is another great place to see lots of different birds. I know along the Katy Trail typically has some pretty decent birding opportunities. If you are more in the central part of the state, here, I am pulling up the one that I'm thinking of in Columbia, Eagle Bluffs Conservation Area. That's a great spot to see birds. But if you are interested, just like maybe you're going to Weston Bend State Park and you just want to see what birds can be found in that area, look it up on iNaturalist or eBird and see what's there and see if there's a lot of species there. But getting to a variety of habitats is also going to help out seeing a lot of different species of birds. Someone commented that they record on the Merlin app when they're out on a walk, and it's surprising how many birds you'll hear. Yes, definitely. And I know, again, I'm working on my bird calls, and I know I miss a ton. Is the Dixisel the same as a meadowlark, or are they very common anymore? They are two different birds. They do look very similar, but meadowlarks, I know there's eastern and western meadowlarks. They are a different species. So yeah, great question. Or is there a great concern for other waterfowl like ducks because of avian flu? To my knowledge, ducks are more affected by avian flu. Pretty much any of our water birds are being more affected by avian flu. I believe it's just how the flu is transmitting like in the water, if I understand correctly. The department has more information on avian flu like on the website to give you like the best information there. But like, again, if I remember correctly, like, yes, ducks are a concern with avian flu. Just for whatever reason, it really doesn't affect Canada geese. I again, don't fully know why. And then a lot of thank yous. So thank you guys so much. I'm glad that you guys really enjoyed it. I'm not seeing any other questions come in, but yeah, thank you so much for joining today. My light turned off in my classroom, so I'm dark now. I'm sorry, but thank you guys.
All right. Thank you all so much. We are glad that you were able to join us. Yes, we did. We are recording this program, so you will be able to watch it again. As soon as I have that link, I will send out the summary email. So thank you for being here, and we hope that you can join us at another virtual program very soon. Thanks so much. Have a good night.